Hi, and welcome to the Project Precocious Podcast, where we explore people making an impact in both the worlds of business and philanthropy. I am Dan New, your host, and one of the founders of Project Precocious, which is a community of young professionals that apply their skills to help nonprofits be more impactful. In our second episode, we get to know David Kim, a veteran, private equity industry rock star, and founder and operator of a nonprofit called Children of Fallen Patriots. After graduating from West Point, David spent 3 years in the U.S. Army. Post-military, he went to business school at Harvard and spent 29 years in private equity. Most of his professional life was spent at Apax Partners, private equity firm with $65 billion in assets under management that was started in 1969. David was on the investment team where he invested in manufacturing, business services, and consumer companies. He later acted as the co-lead of fundraising, where he supported raising $43 billion for the firm. Aside from his professional accomplishments, David's a philanthropist and supports a cause that's very relevant to his background. David and his wife, Cynthia, started Children of Fallen Patriots 21 years ago, which is a nonprofit that provides college scholarships to military children from all branches of the armed forces who lost a parent in the line of duty. To date, the organization has provided $70 million in college scholarships to around 3,000 military children who lost a parent in the line of duty. So, enjoy the comprehensive conversation had with David about his early days in the Army, professional life in private equity, and philanthropic endeavors through Children of Fallen Patriots.
David, so wonderful to have you here today. Thank you. I'd like to kick things off by exploring your early days. So you graduated from West Point and you served as an artillery officer in the U.S. Army during the Operation Just Cause in Panama in 1989. What exactly does an artillery officer do, and how did this experience impact your personal and professional life?
Yeah, so artillery is basically indirect fires using cannons, right? So they're just big guns and typically shot in a parabolic flight path to support infantry units on the ground. And so that's the core of what artillery does. And as a young artillery officer, you have two jobs. One is you'll go spend time with the infantry, basically living as an infantryman, to be the forward observer and be the one that would talk back to the artillery battery and tell them where exactly to shoot. Not only artillery, but also typically mortars, helicopters, and also fixed wing aircraft, if you have those available. So you're trained in how to communicate with all of those weapons platforms and how to deliver, accurate fires in support of our infantry formation. So that was the actual job that I had in Panama as a fire support officer. We didn't get to use any artillery because of the rules of engagement and the risk of collateral damage was too high to the civilians there, but that was my job. And then secondly, as an artillery officer, you also would be in control of the gun. So you'd move back to be a fire direction officer. So you'd be the one getting the calls for fire from the fire support officers. And, you would determine the data that you'd feed into the guns to determine where the bullets go. And so that's, pretty complex. You got to do it quickly under variable weather conditions with lots of different configurations of the artillery rounds and so forth. And so it's a technical job, and, you've got to be able to do it fast, and you got to shoot every single bullet accurately. If you shoot one bullet where it's not supposed to go, you're going to kill somebody, let alone get fired. So that was pretty stressful. So in terms of the other part of your question about, how did that inform the rest of my career? I'd say it really did have a huge impact on the rest of my career, because I just understood the value of, number one, being highly detail oriented, thinking through the entire chain of the process of coming up with the right data, for the guns and where to shoot. You've got to be incredibly detail oriented around that. I've always been a quantitative person, secondly, so I always enjoyed that aspect of finance. Kind of came natural to me after having been in the artillery. And then thirdly, it just really impressed on me the importance of having a system. And, the whole team has to be trained incredibly well, because as a fire direction officer, you've got a team of people that you're working with to come up with the right firing solution. And you might lose the computers and you have to do it by hand, and everyone's got to be able to do it by hand. And then on the guns, you have a whole team of people working each gun, and each part of that's got to be done correctly. So you have to have great systems, great training, and a great process to consistently produce quality. That's what consistently produces high quality. And so that's also informed, my view of how to build a business.
So moving on to building a business in your professional life, you later went on to business school. You went to Harvard Business School and you joined Butler Capital. You stayed there for about 5 years. For reference, during this time, it was the mid-1990s. It was a bit of a recovery period for private equity. Financing was becoming more readily available after a lull that the industry experienced because of a collapse in the high yield markets in the late 80s and early 90s. So what did entering private equity at this phase in the industry teach you that was unique from other junctures that you experienced later on?
A couple different things. One is that, you got to follow your interest in your passions in your work. And, when I got into private equity, I had no idea what private equity was when I first arrived at business school. I was raised by a single mother, worked 3 jobs, and she was an academic. And so I just wandered around at business school after having been in the military. I was like, okay, what's consulting? What's investment banking? I've never heard of this hedge fund thing. What is that? What's private equity? And so it really sounded interesting to me because as a military officer, you have to be able to master many different tasks in pursuit of your big objective. And you have to work through influence and leading people. And that's very similar to, I think, what the core of private equity is all about. So that's why I got into it. Now, as it turns out to be like this, I could claim to have this incredible foresight because it was really the dawn of the private equity industry, more or less. It had just started in the 80s. This was 1994 when I got into private equity. You can go back and double check my memory here, but KKR had one fund and it was $1.3 billion. That gives you a sense for what this industry was like, right? It was really at a nascent stage, and $1 billion fund was a huge fund. And I think there was only a handful, maybe 5 at that point. Butler Capital is one of a handful that had $1 billion funds. And so I got incredibly lucky, from that regard. There's something I really wanted to do. I was in an industry that was just starting out, essentially. And so I've just always encouraged people to take risks, especially while you're young in your career. At that point, there weren't a ton of people trying to go to private equity. Now, business school, everybody's trying to go to private equity, right? So I don't know. Okay, if you like private equity, great, do that. But maybe look for something else where the whole crowd isn't looking and where you're a little bit off the beaten path and where you could be a pioneer in an industry that you really believe in. And so that was the case with me, and it turned out to be incredibly, fortuitous and rewarding. And to see how the industry's evolved has been really remarkable. I'm a huge believer in the long-term outlook for the industry because of the fact that at the end of the day, private equity consistently outperforms. End of story, right? There's a lot of pluses and minuses and so forth about it, but at the end of the day, we consistently produce superior returns for mainly pension funds. And, I managed at Apax, we had the state of Virginia as an investor, and that's where my mother's pension was as a school teacher. So, I took it very seriously, and it really is meaningful to me that we are doing important work, that we are producing good returns for people's retirement plans, and doing it in a way that is built on building value. This caricature of, strip it and flip it. Maybe that was a case in the early 80s or something. It sure has not been the case the whole time I've been in private equity for the last 30 years. You've got to buy smart. Prices continue to go up. Capital structures get ever more creative. But at the end of the day, you've got to find a way to build fundamental value that someone else is willing to pay more for and build a better business. And that's really hard to do, but it consistently produces outsized returns. And so in a world that where, a lot of growth is challenged and, I think there's going to be a consistent demand for private equity going forward, especially as the retail market comes into the private equity space because of the SEC deregulation around 401ks. That's going to be a tremendous tidal wave of capital. You look at the capital that's in 401ks compared to the institutional investment market, it's much larger. So I think the legs are there for the industry for a long time to come.
So you end up leaving Butler and you switched to Apax, as you mentioned. you start focusing on manufacturing and business services and consumer companies. So what motivated the change in firm, and why these sectors in particular?
So I've always liked, I'll just back up and say why buyouts versus venture capital, because I did an internship in a venture capital firm while I was at HBS, and then focused on the buyout place is where I wanted to go. I think the venture field is super interesting, and I think that you have to have a real view around industry trends, and I didn't feel like at that point in my career I had sort of a really defined view around where certain trends were going to go with the VC firm that I was working at. And then secondly, I really like just fundamental analysis, probably just by my personality. I don't know who was it, Warren Buffett said he just, he likes to invest in things he understands. Doesn't mean you can't make money with stuff that you don't understand, but just for him, he likes to invest in stuff that he understands. I guess maybe I'm somewhat similar in the desire to be able to tear businesses apart and really analyze it. I think that also ties back to why I was in the artillery, right? It's, you can see you really got to be able to get your hands on the fundamentals and the analysis. So that's why I focused on buyouts. At that point, there really wasn't tech investing. You think in 1994, when I graduated from business school, there was no internet outside of a lab. Think about that one for a minute. There was no internet. There was no email at that point. We had to get our legal documents, you would fax them. Then you would fax a 200-page document across, and that's how you would swap stuff back and forth. You would go in for due diligence to an actual data room. There's the reason it's called a data room is because in the day, it was a room with a bunch of boxes in a big conference room, and you'd go there and you'd transcribe things into your laptop. It's like a completely different world, right? Let alone there was no cell phones, right? Were you still using pay phones back then? There was no voicemail when I started in private equity. So it was a completely different world. And so manufacturing, distribution, consumer products, retail, things like that, that's, pretty much very obvious place for the industry to start. And it kind of worked for me because I felt like I could understand those businesses. And so it was very interesting and had a lot of fun doing that.
So during this time, you served on many boards in various industries. Could you share some of the key principles for successful business leadership and insights for being a good board member?
Yeah, I think a couple different things, and having made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so I don't claim to have a lot of unique knowledge or be better than other people, but just from what I've distilled down in not only in the private equity career that I've had, but in the charitable business that I built, the charity that we built, right, which has raised about $100 million over the last 20 years, and we started from scratch. I say in terms of being an effective board member, you really got to get the big things right. You really boil it down to there's probably 2 or 3 things that really, really matter. It's really easy to get distracted with a lot of different things going on, but really trying to focus in on those 2 or 3 really big issues that are needle movers is really important. It's obvious to say, but it's a little bit hard to do when there's so much coming at you at a business. But getting those things identified is really important, number one. Number two, I'd say I love a phrase that one of my partners at Apax came up with, which is called changing the course of the river, which is really just thinking outside the box. Don't get trapped in the paradigms. Don't think just because we've always done it this way that we need to continue to do it that way. Change the course of the river. How are we going to attack this? Let's come up with something that's fresh and different, both offensively, but also defensively. And changing the course of the river, I think, is a really unique skill set that I see. It's surprising how few people are able to do that consistently and really well. And I think private equity is known for doing that. And so I think it's been a great thing to learn. So changing the course of the river would be another one. I think, leading through influence and interpersonal relationships would be a third one. They're really hard to do. They're really tricky to do. I think it kind of ties back to the first one. You may have a manager they have a lot of glaring weaknesses in one area, but they've got some really incredible strengths in others. And maybe if those strengths align with those 2 or 3 things that really matter for your business, and, they can think outside the box and be adept. Okay, you can work with someone who's not perfect, right? And at the same time, if you just don't think that they're fundamentally aligned with the things that matter in your business at that point in time. And that could change, right? At one point, you maybe go through a growth phase and you need a leader who's really good at growth. And that's maybe not the same leader that can deal with a downturn and ripping out a bunch of costs when you get whacked with a recession. And you need to change things. I saw my partners do that very adeptly. And that's tough. It's really tough. It's like, you produce really great results for us for many years. Climate is different. What really matters is different now. Sorry, we got to go with somebody else. And so being able to make those tough calls and make changes quickly is very important. I'd say there's the old saw of hire slow and fire fast. And that's also something it's easy to say, but the more I've lived it is like the more I believe it. Man, if you have a gut feeling, you just better do it fast. And it's really easy to sort of rationalize, well, we'll give them another chance and, see how this KPI improves over time, or we'll coach them up. And I don't know. I think it's pretty hard to pull off. You gotta make changes quickly. So I think those would be the main things I'd point to.
So in the spirit of changing the course of the river, after 15 years on the investment side of the business, you transitioned to fundraising.
Yeah.
You ended up co-leading a team that raised $43 billion in 14 years. What prompted this change, and what qualities distinguish a good investment professional from a good fundraising professional?
So what led to that change was that the industry was evolving. We had, at that point, it was 2009 or 10 when I transitioned over. Obviously, the industry's growing a lot. Funds are getting much bigger. People were standing up in-house fundraising organizations as opposed to just using placement agents like back in the day. And so that's what we wanted to do as well as we got much bigger. And in all candor, we had a tough Fund 7 as well. It was an 07 vintage fund. It was much bigger than Fund 6. Strategy drift a little bit. Returns were really tough. And so that was another internal tactical reason why we needed to have an internal fundraising team to really drive the fundraising. And so I thought it'd be a really interesting challenge to step up to. I'd been doing deals for 15 years and really enjoyed that, but I'd never done fundraising. Fundraising gives you a different perspective on the firm. You work every day with the CEO. You have visibility on the key parts of our investment committee. In fact, I became an observer on the investment committee and on the portfolio review committee. So seeing how the firm made decisions and why, everything happening within the portfolio, you're really tuned into strategic issues that are affecting the industry, the macroeconomy. We're a global investment firm. And so I had to be, adept at dealing with those global issues. And then, of course, you're dealing with these investors that are thinking not only about private equity, but other asset classes and also, at a very strategic level all over the world. So I just thought that was a really interesting and fun new set of challenges. I really enjoyed that in terms of being able to take up the altitude, in my view, on the world. And that worked out really well. I mean, when I left 20 equity partners at the firm, there are 2 of us who raised the money and the rest of the firm effectively invested it. And so it worked out really well. And we were able to, as you say, get some good results on the fundraising side over time.
So moving on to philanthropy, you founded Children of Fallen Patriots in 2002, so more than 20 years ago, and you've been hands-on with the organization ever since. Can you tell us about the early days of thinking about starting this organization and then pivoting to starting it, and then lastly, expanding it into what it is today?
Sure. So the original impetus going all the way back to the beginning came in on December 20th, 1989, when we kicked off the invasion of Panama, and in the middle of the night. And unfortunately, Sergeant Delaney Gibbs was killed in action. We were in the same battalion. I didn't know him personally, but he was the only member of our unit who was killed. And that was a few months before his daughter was due, and he was only 20 or 21. So, that was a tough one for all of us. And I just kept thinking about his daughter and what was going to happen to her. And of course, there are many thousands of kids like her who lose a parent in the military, not only due to combat, but also due to training accidents, because you have to train under very realistic, dangerous conditions, to suicide, unfortunately, which is a huge problem, as well as, service-connected illnesses that happen out there. Like, felt the family that the dad was exposed to a bunch of raw uranium in Uzbekistan and, got cancer from it and died. So, these are tough things. And so many years later, after business school in 2001 is when we really started working on this. I was sort of hiking with a friend through the mountains in South Dakota, and we're brainstorming and kind of came up with this as really the perfect way to honor the sacrifice of our fallen heroes. Because if you think about someone's gone, they died, well, what can you do for them? It's really what they really care about. Probably their first priority is take care of their kids and make sure their kids are going to have the bright future that every parent wants for their kids. And of course, a college education is the key to that. So that's how we landed on that mission. From there, I did kind of the classic business school market sizing, and I wanted to understand, is there a need? Okay, this sounds great, but is there a need already? Who are the other providers in this space? How big is the market? How is that need being met or not met? And how much is the need in terms of people and dollars, and what's the right way to address that? So we actually did a case study with a couple of B school MBA students, and over the course of a semester, and determined that there really was a need, that there were about 25,000 students who lost a parent over the last 35 years, that there are some VA programs, but it does not cover the full cost of college, is the net of it. It leaves about a $25,000 gap for one student for 4 years of college. And while there are a host of college scholarship granting organizations out there, they tend to be very small and focus on one slice of the pie. Special operations or Marines or pilots from the Navy or so forth. Whereas the bulk of the casualties are occurring, and when the war kicked off, of course, this really demonstrated it clearly, but in the Army, right? Because that's where most of the people are, number one, biggest branch, and number two, that's, they're doing a lot of dangerous jobs on the ground. So we cover all branches of the military, all those causes of death in terms of combat and suicide and training and illnesses, and it's about $625 million total need, so $25,000 times 25,000 kids. And so since we got started, we've been fortunate to provide about $75 million in total support, which is scholarships plus some other support, to about 3,100 students all across the country.
Thank you for that. That's very meaningful work. So you currently act as the CEO of Children of Fallen Patriots, and the organization has about 25 people that work for it. Could you basically juxtapose the day-to-day of running Children of Fallen Patriots versus your role when you were also working and involved in the organization?
Yeah, it's funny. There's been a huge amount of synergy between what I've learned in the private equity space, not only in fundraising, but in doing deals and serving on boards, and the charitable space. So by that, I mean a couple of different things. One is from a governance standpoint, skin in the game. My wife and I are the biggest individual donors. We've never taken a salary. The board members have a massive amount of skin in the game. They cover almost all of the admin expense. So 96% of our revenue is available for programs, which is a very, very high level. And then we run the charity like a business. So we have a perfect rating from Charity Navigator. I think fewer than 1% of charities do that. And so we're really proud of the governance and the way that we've run the charity like a business. Number one. Number two is we set a really high bar for our internal expectation of how we run, because we want to run it like a world-class organization. Separate from being a charity, we want to run it like a great business, because that's what's going to do the best job for our families that we serve and for our donors. And it's been really interesting to see the relative lack of talent in the charity space. There are some very talented people there. A lot of the people, unfortunately, in the charity space would never make it in the business world. And so by just implementing basic, processes and systems and setting high standards, just things around gratitude, how do you just go out and say thank you to people? Like, it's the most obvious thing ever, but you'd be shocked at how many of our donors have said, gosh, I've given a lot of money to these other charities and no one's ever just said thank you. Right. And we have a whole process. We have a system where, we make sure that we can consistently deliver those results to our donors, where we're just consistently going out and saying thank you to them as a very basic thing to do. And that ties back to what I mentioned at the very beginning with the artillery, right? If you don't have a system and a process and training to consistently produce a machine that's going to consistently produce those results, you're not going to do a great job. So that's just one small example. On the other side, with the families, we've made it an incredibly efficient process for them. And that's also differentiating. A lot of times they tell us, well, we have to hit some deadline. If we miss the deadline for the other group to get their charity money, then, we can't get any money for another year. But, I really need this and I have a problem. So we're open 24/7. We don't have them writing essays about their loss because I understand why charities do it. It sounds fine on a piece of paper. In reality, it's just asking someone to relive the worst trauma they've ever had in their life, right? For what? For you? So that you can justify giving them money? I don't need to see that. I know they lost their parent. We document that they're lost a parent in the service. That's it. Like, you're going to get money from us, and we're just going to make it easy for you to do that. And so, those are some of the small examples of how we've tried to run it. And at the end of the day, I also just it comes back to our faith. I mean, this is a secular organization, so we're not running it as a religious organization, but our personal faith really informs why we're doing this and how we try to do it. And the biggest lever in that is just using the golden rule. Just treat people like you want to be treated. Our families, we want to make it easy for them because they've done so much for us. We don't need to add to their stack of things to do or burdens, emotional burdens. And our donors, we should just thank them. You should just do that, right? Because they're doing a really great thing by enabling our mission. So that's how we approach it.
So the board at Children of Fallen Patriots consists of some extremely accomplished individuals, executives and leaders of financial firms, consumer companies, and media companies. What do you feel motivates so many influential people to contribute their time and their resources to your organization compared to others?
Well, I'd say, I don't know if it's a competition per se. It's just, why would they have so much on their plate, right? Why would they choose to spend time with fallen patriots? I think number one, they love their country. They appreciate these military families that have made such a huge sacrifice and that enable us to live our lives. And in particular, because they're so blessed, right? They have a particularly heightened sense of appreciation for the opportunities that this country presents. And that's all based on the foundation of the military service members who've died for our country. And so they're, I think particularly appreciative of the blessings that they've enjoyed and love their country and want to help. And there's no one more deserving on these kids who lost a parent. So I think that's a huge reason. Number two, I think, a lot of them, it's really interesting. They come from very middle class, normal backgrounds, and they've worked their butt off and they've accomplished a lot. And so I think that also makes them want to help to, preserve that ladder of opportunity for others. And they're extremely philanthropic and invest back into, helping others and paying it forward. And so they got this extremely philanthropic mindset. So separate from the patriotism, right? It's this idea that I've been very blessed and I want to pass those blessings on to other people. And then thirdly, I think, maybe it also has something to do with how we run the organization, that, they can trust that their credibility is going to be honored and we're going to be a good steward of them. I mean, they're putting their chips in the line for Fallen Patriots by activating their networks and lending us their name. And I think anyone in that case would want to know that they're partnered with an organization that's going to do a great job and reflect positively on them and take care of their contacts and their relationship and so forth. And so hopefully we've done that too.
So raising money is extremely tough, but critical for nonprofits to fulfill their purposes. You've raised a very generous sum since starting the organization. What is your approach to raising funds been? And how can those listening be better fundraisers for the causes that they care about?
Well, I'd say a couple different things. One is start with who you know. It's really all about who you know. It's all about those personal relationships. We've had many conversations where we're like, we ought to go to Northrop and Boeing because they're military and they should give a lot of money to military causes. Well, okay, us and 40,000 other military charities. And they're trying to wade through all of that. And if they don't know us, we're not going to get very much money out of them in all reality in terms of, time for on ROI on our time. So it all starts with who you know. And Cynthia and I come from nothing. Like I said, My dad was an immigrant. My mom was a single parent, worked 3 jobs. My wife's parents were immigrants that came to this country and had a little small business and raised 5 kids. And like when we started Fallen Patriots, we had her college couch and a rented townhouse. We didn't own anything really. And she was kind of mad at me with the initial money I put into it because she's like, I need a couch, man. Like, why are you putting all this money into this? But she's been an incredible partner throughout it. But my point being that if we can do it, anybody can do it because we come from nothing and no contacts. And it just starts with who you know. I think number one, because that's what's going to make a difference for you is, there's been a lot of situations where a CEO of a company we were close to, they just love this cause and they're like, okay, yeah, we're going to do this. And that's like multiple $100,000 donation. Boom, right there, right? Because that's how the world works. So number one, focus on who you know. Number two is, Jim Collins, Good to Great, the flywheel. Just start pushing on that flywheel. I think it's like Teddy Roosevelt's quote, do what you can with what you have where you are right now. We've been doing this for 21 years. It's been a super long road. It takes a long time to get things moving and get some results. And it kind of sucks a lot of times along the way. And you're thinking, geez, man, is this really worth it? I don't think I'm getting anywhere here. But you just got to keep plugging away and, eventually it happens. And so, I'd say that's the second big thing that, I've learned about doing this. And thirdly, I'd say make sure that we all have to check our egos and our motivations. And there's a lot of egos in the charity space, and because people are not remunerated monetarily, right? So what are they getting out of this? Unfortunately, a lot of them are getting psychological income, and they feel like they are, it's all about them and this is their platform to be recognized or, to be generous and give people things and so forth. And they want to be in a lot of pictures and whatever. I think we all have to really just check that and make sure that we're being very careful about who we're partnering with in that regard. So for example, our board members, I've never brought on a board member who was like, hey, I could do all this stuff for you. I'm really famous. Put me on the board and I'll do it. It's been the other way around. It's been, they've gotten involved. They just wanted to help. They really made, huge impacts in some way over a period of years. And we got to know them and knew that they weren't political and they weren't ego driven. And then we asked them to join the board. And so we got this board that's incredibly engaged, as opposed to a lot of times you got to pull teeth or you got to battle political fights. And we just haven't had that, so we've been very fortunate. So I guess those would be the things I'd focus on.
So when it comes to vision, you've had a pretty good one. You noticed that private equity was going to be something significant. Maybe there was a bit of luck in that decision. Nonetheless, it played out. You started an organization that's become extremely successful and has helped thousands of young individuals go to school. I'm curious about what your vision is for Children of Fallen Patriots, and what is the next big milestone that would bring you immense fulfillment?
So our vision for Fallen Patriots is really just brutally simple, which is to get all 25,000 students funded and get that $625 million need funded. And that's been one of the reasons why I think Fallen Patriots has had some success, is that we have a very, very clear mission. It's very easy to measure. It's very easy to describe. It's very high on the hierarchy of urgency and perceived need, because it's very hard for anyone to argue why would you not want to do this for these students? And then it's very clear what we do, and then you can see an ROI from it. So, it's never been done in our country's history where we took care of the college needs of all of these students. As crazy as that sounds, right? $625 million, and so let's say we've taken care of 75 million of it, so we've got 550 to go. That's not that much money. It's a lot of money, but it's not that much money, right? Because there are charities that raise multiples of that every year. And the federal government, lights that much money on fire like every 5 minutes. So I think that at the end of the day, we can get there. And that's my goal before I'm dirt, is to get that taken care of, and then get in a position where we can get ahead of the curve and make sure that all kids who are, going to lose a parent are going to get taken care of. Because, unfortunately, it is going to happen again. there will be at some point another world war. It'll be probably beyond what we could imagine in terms of how horrible it'll be. In terms of World War I, World War II, we're just beyond what anyone could have conceived. And, unfortunately, human nature hasn't changed. So it's going to happen again eventually. And we just have to be ready for it.
I'm confident that with Children of Fallen Patriots being led by you and the others that you've assembled on the board, we will be. So moving on to a quick fire round. This entails just giving 30-second answers to a few questions. First, who do you admire and why?
My personal hero, there's a lot of people, I'd say Jesus, number one, for sure. But I think in terms of like a more secular answer, would be Teddy Roosevelt. I just am fascinated by his life. He came from a life of privilege, although he was always for the regular people of this world. He always pushed himself really hard. And I think, it's kind of the definition of noblesse oblige, to whom much is given, much is expected. And he lived that in his personal life in every dimension of his public service and his personal accomplishments and conquering asthma, right? He was the antithesis of the current reigning victim culture in our country. We've got this incredibly unhealthy trend in our nation where the best thing you can be is a victim, and the more victim boxes you can check, the more exalted you are, and it's just incredibly debilitating. As opposed to, saying, "Well, I'm an asthmatic and severe asthmatic." He almost died a couple times. Instead of staying in his little box, he worked out really, really hard and conquered it and became this incredibly accomplished outdoorsman. So I think that's one of the reasons I admire him is his public service. I think is very admirable. He put his volunteer for service in the Spanish-American War, and of course the many services he rendered to our country is well cataloged. And I just love his whole philosophy of life. That quote that I gave: "Do what you can with what you have, where you are right now." And then, of course, I think his most famous quote for me is the man in the arena speech, where it's a very difficult time that we're living through in our country. I think it's going to get more difficult in the next 10 to 20 years. And I understand why people are disillusioned and say, politics stinks and I hate it and everybody sucks and I'm just not going to be involved. Well, politics is going to be involved in your life, whether or not you're involved in politics, right? And so we all have to do our part in doing what we think is right to shape the future for our kids, because it's going to happen. And if we're not careful, then, normal people all withdraw, then just the nuts are in charge. And I don't think any of us want that on either side of the aisle. So I think that man in the arena speech really resonates for the times that we live in.
So life is extremely busy for many, certainly yourself. How do you balance doing so many things well and living your personal motto, which is God, country, and family?
Well, I think it's not easy, but I think it comes down to prioritization. I think that God, country, family is very deliberate in terms of how I thought about that as a motto. I'll give you an example. We have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. And, and that's as they're young and they're doing sports, and, fell into that trap of just being super, super busy, and it just frayed our whole family's relationship. I was somewhere else with my wife all weekend. The kids were exhausted. We come home on Sundays and we're like, hurry up and get your, homework done. And everyone's tired. And I didn't have time to do date night with my wife. And so our marriage is suffering. And, a lot of my friends had gotten divorced, and and then we took a step back one day and we're like, hold on, there's a reason why God says, have a Sabbath day. That's, it's really important. Why did he say that? Well, because then we just restructured our whole life around that. We said, okay, Sunday's a Sabbath day. We're not going to do anything. I'm not going to work. You're not doing homework. So that means that we're going to get your sports done during the week if we can, and maybe on Saturday, but we're going to get all of our stuff done. Then I can have a date night with my wife on Saturday night. We can hang around as a family and play games and watch a football game, or take a nap, or just do whatever. And man, it just really changed our life a lot. And just those small things. So I think it just comes down to prioritization, being very deliberate, what really matters to us, and then doing that and cutting out a lot of other things, because it's so easy to get sucked into that busyness poker and feeling like, well, we're falling behind, and you go to the cocktail party and God, it seems like everyone else's kids are great athletes and they're all running around in hockey at 5 o'clock in the morning, and maybe I'm not doing something right. And I just have to be like, whatever. Okay, great, good for them. I don't care. Right? I'm just not doing it. Right? I'm going to be home taking a nap on Sunday and play Monopoly with my kids, and that's great. That's what I care about. So I think at the end of the day, just kind of really think about what matters and then ruthlessly cut everything else out of your life. And I don't have like a lot of hobbies. I would work, of course, like crazy, private equity, you travel like crazy. I would call Fallen Patriots was my 10 to midnight job because I put the kids to bed and then I'd do some more work in the evening. And, it just kind of is what it is. And I don't go golf and I don't go off on boys' weekends and all that kind of stuff. I just don't care about that. Now, what I care about is my family and following our faith and doing well at work and doing well with Fallen Patriots. And that's been staying fit. And that's pretty much it.
If you can manage all those things, kudos to you. And it seems like you've not. So you recently held your 14th annual Greenwich Gala. Could you share a highlight that puts a big smile on your face associated with that event?
Well, I'd say the highlight was our student speaker, Olivia Snow. She lost her dad in a helicopter crash in Korea when she was, just 2 years old. So she really doesn't have any memory of him. But, she's just such a resilient young lady who's so full of joy, has a really, really noticeable spark in her eye, and is doing so well in college and living out her faith and her values and honoring her dad's memory. And she spoke, at our gala and was just so charming. And I think just embodied our mission so well. And there was just this tremendous outpouring of support and love and appreciation for her and this special feeling, in the room. And that's really hard to get, in today's day and age. There's so much negativity out there. It's so hard to focus on what unifies us as opposed to what's dividing us. And it's really nice to have that moment where we can all come together around our shared values.
So let's say I'm a young professional who is listening to this podcast and wants to contribute to Children of Fallen Patriots. How can my efforts be most effective in supporting you and the organization?
Well, I think one of the best ways is to start or join a junior board. So we have a junior board in New York, and we're starting to branch out. I think we have some people in San Francisco. But, what we need are people who are doers, right? There's always a lot of people who say, well, you want to call this person or you want to have a event in this city and have a golf thing. Okay, that's great. Good idea. Would you lead that for us? And then you get a lot of people like, well, kind of do the Homer Simpson into the bushes, right? So it sounds like a lot of work, right? So what we need are doers and people who are going to just pick up an oar and start rowing in whatever way makes sense to them. And it could be a group of young professionals that maybe they want to host some type of yearly event to raise a certain amount of money for our charity, or they could be a conduit into their companies. A lot of companies have really big foundations that are giving grants. They're doing matching. A lot of big companies have veteran ERGs as well, which are a great connectivity point where we've had a lot of companies that have raised a lot of money for us that way. So there's a lot of different ways that people can make a difference in whatever way works in their life, but it's just a matter of they're going to, pick up the flag and lead it forward. And so that would be the best thing to do. So people can send me an email and I can connect them with the right people. If you like, it's David just send it to David at e210capital.com. That's my personal email. And we can get people squared away.
Wonderful. David, I cannot thank you enough for having the privilege of speaking with you today and for the contributions that you've made to the industry of private equity, to the world of philanthropy by way of Children of Fallen Patriots, and lastly, to our country.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. By the way, I wanted to just add one thing, if you don't mind, to the answer that I gave on how to balance things. A lot of different balls in the air. The biggest thing I forgot, or I should have mentioned, is the partnership I've had with my wife, because she has been a true partner in every sense of the word around Fallen Patriots. She her best friend lost her brother-in-law in a train crash and had some kids. And so this is a personal mission for her. Her dad was in the Navy as well. And so she's, from day one, she co-founded Fallen Patriots. She's looked after giving out all the scholarships to the families that we serve. And I've looked after the sort of the more business and fundraising side, but it's been a true partnership. And so, I don't want to take credit for all of that because she's been just a partner at every step of the way in Fallen Patriots and absolutely indispensable and puts a lot of heart into our mission. And the second thing I would say that it's our Sowers on Marriage been a partnership. I'm not personally a believer in this modern thought of, couples can have everything. Both of them can have big careers and really successful kids and, blah, blah, blah. There's a cost to everything. It's just not realistic to expect that, two people can work, crazy hours and have kids that are going to have all the attention that they need because, the nanny's going to raise them and so forth. That's probably controversial. It's probably a lot of people don't like that opinion. But it's just, there's a cost. And so just understand where that cost is. And maybe it's fine. It works for people. They're going to have two big careers and the nanny's going to, whatever, to spend a lot of time with the kids. And they figure out a way to make it happen. But but probably it's because they recognize that there's a cost of that and they do other things to compensate, right? And so they create that space to have that family time and have that time together as a couple and so forth that keeps the family together. And so what my point isn't exactly how you do it. My point is you can't have everything without a cost, right? So analyze your life, what works for you, but recognize what's the cost, what's the danger spot, and then do something to compensate. My way of compensating for that was saying no to a lot of stuff. My wife stayed home with her to take care of our kids, and our kids have turned out great. We have two that are at West Point, one U Chicago, and one at UPenn. And not that school's a measure of how they've turned out, but they're incredible kids with great values. And three of them are going to be in the service. And I put a lot of credit with that toward her because that was her, main focus while I was off, trying to do deals and stuff. So that's my point isn't just to say like this works or that doesn't. It's just to really analyze your life and where are you going to cut things out and where are you going to put in the big focus points.
Wonderful. Partnership certainly matters. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Dan. Great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for joining us for the second episode of the Project Precocious Podcast. Be sure to learn more about Children of Fallen Patriots at their website, www.fallenpatriots.org. A special thanks to my two partners at Project Precocious, Jacob Posada and Grant Gilbert, for their generous contributions to supporting our portfolio of nonprofits that we partner with and expanding the Project Precocious community. Until next time, stay well.